This is We All Be News and Radio.
Ron Hurd. Get up out of bed. Let's go. Let's go. Ron Hurd. That's the word. Get out of bed. Give me a jingle. My number 051. Get out of bed. Let's go. Don't be afraid. This is Herb Smith calling you. Herb Smith. All right, I know you're famous and all that kind of stuff, but let's go. Get out of bed.
Hello, and welcome back, everybody, to another wonderful edutainment edition of the Artivist Presents We All Be News and Radio. I'm your host for the Empowerment segment, R2C2H2, the Artivist, also known as Brother Ron, coming at you with a fresh show, so fresh to death, it gotta live. That's how fresh it is. I'm just being corny right now because I got a great guest coming on. If you want to participate in this segment, in this teaching, please feel free to call in, area code 646-652-4593. Once again, that's area code 646-652-4593. If you're scared to get on the air, you can listen online. I'm about to open up the chat room. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, scholars and laymen, I bring to you the one and only, the original hip-hop entrepreneur, mogul, visionary, extraordinaire, the one and only, the very humble, the very great, Michael Holman. Are you there, Brother Michael?
I think I am. Am I there?
You are there. Welcome
am I coming in loud and clear?
Oh, yes, sir.
All
very
right,
loud
man.
And clear. Welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you on.
But it's an honor to be on again. This is probably my third or fourth appearance on your show over the years.
Yeah, it's been a while. Actually, you came in on the first year of my show doing this podcast series. You have, put out a lot of interesting jewels and gems out there for the people, and people should go back to the archives and listen to those shows we did together. I mean, you're a very brilliant man. You're very much a visionary in the truest sense of the word. You actually manifest the word hip-hop.
No, that's not true. I have to correct you on that. Nobody knows who came up with the term hip-hop. I mean, that's something that probably there's nobody out there who could say, no, I invented it. No, I invented it. It was something that in the even probably as early as the 60s, a lot of you out there who are old enough know that there had always been call-outs where you heard something similar to hippie hop. You had like DJ Hollywood, who was an early rapping DJ in New York City in the 70s, even in the 60s, who was saying things like, chanting to the crowd and motivating them and using terms like a hip, a hop, a hippie hop, you don't stop. What I'm credited for in terms of the term hip hop, legitimately credited for, is I was the first person or the first journalist to use the term in a publication, to actually print the term and define it. And that was back in January of 1982 in a newspaper called the East Village Eye out of downtown New York. And in an interview with DJ Africa Bambaataa, which was sort of the beginnings of my official hip-hop impresario and producer and and entrepreneur, as you said, mover and shaker. One of the first roles I had was as a journalist and writing for the East Village Eye. I wrote probably about 5 articles on this emerging culture, and so this one that I wrote, it was an interview of DJ Africa Bambaataa. In that interview, I used the term hip hop, defined it, talked about how, and what's interesting now, looking back, is I defined it as, and I still believe in this definition, hip-hop is defined as a culture first coming out of the Bronx in an organized and in a cohesive manner that consists of multiple disciplines: DJing, turntablism, rapping, graffiti art, breakdancing, a certain language, a certain fashion, and that's what we all thought of as hip hop. Especially in the later '82 and into the later '80s. Nowadays, of course, hip hop, through the efforts of, and maybe just by the natural flow of commerce and culture, nowadays hip hop is defined strictly, unspoken, but strictly as rap and rap alone. So if you're talking today, when you talk about hip hop artists, hip hop culture, hip hop this or hip hop that, for the most part, most people are talking about one thing and one thing only, and that's rap music. But that's not how we, hip hop pioneers from back in the day saw it. We saw hip hop as a multifaceted, multidisciplinary culture that included all the elements. And I, as an old school hip hopper, I still believe in that definition as a multifaceted culture.
I'm glad to hear from a person. Go ahead. No, go ahead. You want to add anything more?
Well, no, I was just sort of addressing, and I kind of super long response about, you saying that, I came up with the term. I mean, I'm just saying, by no means did I come up with the term. It had been thrown around quite a bit, but I can tell you this too: as late as 1982, even though what we understand as hip-hop culture with all the different elements, again, graffiti art and DJing, rapping, and all those things, those disciplines, those creative disciplines, had been around for many years, but nobody ever called it hip-hop. Not until well into 1982 did it become a common term. And I challenge anybody out there who has flyers, flyers from events in New York, whether it be in the Bronx or uptown in Manhattan or in Brooklyn or Queens. I challenge anybody to show me a flyer that is advertising and promoting an event that we would call a hip-hop event, right? With certain artists and certain people are going to be there and certain graphics and an address and a time and, how to dress and what to do, like typical flyers role in bringing a crowd, promoting a crowd. I challenge anybody to show me a flyer before 1982 that has the word hip-hop on it. Even though this culture had been happening at least since 76, 77, where these and I'll tell you what we did call it. I'll tell you what it was called by the real pioneers like Bambaataa and Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash. When those guys would be throwing parties, these events would be called all kinds of things. On the flyers, you'd have like, come up to the jam. Like jam was used a lot. Park jam. For some weird reason, I don't know why. I think it had something to do with chic. The term executive style was thrown around a lot, like dress executive style on these flyers, which is so strange. Another word that was super common and was really, if you will, the real name for this culture in the beginning anyway, was disco. Disco was what, these park jams were all about. See, what you have to understand, what a lot of people have to understand, and I can imagine some of your listeners out there like thinking, man, how cool, I'm a big hip-hop fan. If I could go into a time machine, I would love to go back to the Bronx in like 1978 or 79, and I know if I went back in time, there'd be all these hip-hop parties and clubs all over the place, and people would be talking about hip-hop and dressing this way and that, and I'd be going to these things, and wow, how exciting that would be. Well, they'd be disappointed, because if they went back in time to one of these jams that, for example, that let's just say Bambaataa might have thrown, that I used to go to in the late 70s and early 80s in the Bronx River Community Center, for example, which was a complex of about 5 or 6 projects, like project council flat apartment buildings that were sort of in a circle, and in the middle of the circle was a community center, Bronx River Community Center, and BAM would oftentimes throw parties in the park around the projects or inside the Bronx River projects, outdoors in the summer or in the late spring, early fall, what have you. And when he threw these parties, first of all, oftentimes there wasn't a charge to get in. It was just something that the community might have sponsored just to, give the kids something to have a good time and have a party, keep kids out of trouble. The whole point, the audience that would come to these events, more often than not, 90% of these events would be visited by kids from junior high school levels. Junior high and younger. High school kids and older, they didn't go to these things. As a matter of fact, hip-hop was a pejorative. Hip-hop, to most of the people, if you went back in time and found yourself in the Bronx and you went up to somebody who, let's just say they were 19 years old. That's a young person, right? You walked up to them and say, "Hey, man, where's the hip-hop? I want to go to Bambaataa Throwdown." They'd say, "I don't want to go to that old hippie hip-hop shit." That's what they would have said. They wanted to go downtown and see Luther Vandross at the Garden and take a date. They wanted to put on a nice outfit and see the Gap Band at Bonds and take a date and, later on get laid, and spread some money around, take her out to dinner and, do grown-up things. Going to what, if you'd like to call those events now, looking back, these park jams as hip-hop events, looking back, these were events that were attended by mostly junior high kids who didn't have the money to go downtown, who didn't have a wardrobe where they could get into these events or go to Studio 54 or go to different discos that were happening downtown at the time, the Les Jardins of the world, the Barney Googles of the world. They didn't have the wherewithal to participate in what was a national urban pop cultural pop culture. Again, going to see Funkadelic at the Garden or seeing the Gap Band or going to do this or going to the disco and dancing all night. They didn't have the money. They weren't old enough. So they became the vanguard of hip-hop. These junior high school kids became the engine that drove hip-hop in the mid and late 70s into the early 80s. Without that group, without that generation, I don't think hip-hop would have existed. Because nobody else cared about it. All they cared about was, what's the latest national, rock star or soul star or disco star. And that they're not coming up to the Bronx, performing out in the park somewhere. That's not happening. So in an interesting way, and that kind of segues to something, I want to make a quick little digression about Graffiti Rock and my 30th anniversary Kickstart campaign, if I may. Yeah. I just like to remind everybody out there, to go to Kickstarter and type in Graffiti Rock and pledge and help me re-release this important historic TV show. I'm sure we're going to talk about this, Ron. Here I am talking up a storm. You know me, though. You know I can talk.
Yeah, you're a talker, but also you talk with substance. A lot of people don't talk with substance, and you're a historian. Like you say, you're an armchair anthropologist, you told me one time. I believe,
you're right.
A while back. But, you got a lot of insight into the social and happening of that time. You got a lot of insight into what was going on at that time. And the popular narrative is not always the truthful narrative. And I believe you're giving out the truthful narrative.
Well, and what I wanted to say about transitioning for a second, if I could plug the Kickstarter campaign, is when I released Graffiti Rock in 1984, after having been, a hip-hop, promoter and impresario and pioneer, being really inspired to do this by my good friend, Fab Five Freddy, who turned me on to the scene in '79, and I really took the ball and ran with it. after having really been promoting this stuff promoting this culture since 1979, by 84, 5 years later, I'm putting this TV show together, and I want to get it out in the airwaves and make sure that the world sees this. Of course, I had to make certain compromises, commercial compromises. It couldn't have been hardcore Bronx on TV or wouldn't have made it. But a lot of people said, oh man, it was kind of, how come it wasn't more gangster? Well, first of all, there wasn't any gangster rap in 1984, and something that wasn't really the goal of hip hop culture back then. It was really about, if you listen to Bambaata's music, peace, love, unity, and having fun. I mean, Bambaata says it best that this was a movement about peace and about respect and about loving each other, and it was very inclusive too, and it really turned into a very exclusive, very crime and misogyny and violence-driven medium. At least the rap did later on in the 80s, as we know, when gangster rap kind of appeared. And that wasn't happening when I first put Graffiti Rock together. That wasn't where people were coming from. Listen to the music before it hit L.A. and listen to the difference. And, it's kind of interesting. I don't know how many people out there have seen this. Questlove posted on Facebook a story that he found that was rather interesting about how there's this conspiracy theory, which I don't know if it's a theory or not, whether it's real or not, that in the music business and the prison industrial complex colluded together to say the prison and industrial complex basically said to the music business, if you can really promote this gangster rap and really get people excited about this misogynistic, ultra-violent, ultra-angry rap music that glorifies prison and glorifies crime, then we're going to be able to really stuff our prisons and and we'll both make lots of money. And you know something? Whether it's a real conspiracy or not, whether it's true or not, it is true.
Yeah.
And it happened. So it is, whether it's true or not, it's true. I mean, I'm kind of going off on a digression here. I'm kind of digressing here, but it's just something that kind of upset me. I remember like yesterday, Ron, when I first heard the first gangster rap records. And I remember being taken aback and kind of being shocked. I mean, you got to understand, I was not born and raised in New York. I came to New York in 1978 after finishing school in San Francisco, but I'd gone to university in San Francisco. I was born in San Francisco, but I'd gone to high school as well, partly in San Francisco, partly in L.A. I spent 2 years in L.A. I was in L.A. before the Bloods ever showed up. There was no Bloods in the years that I was in L.A. There's only the Crips, the A.C. There's a lot of gangs. I don't remember them all, but I certainly remember the Crips and all the different chapters of the Crips and the A.C. and there was a lot of other gangs too, Mexican gangs, whatever. Some of them were interracial, I think, too. But at that time in L.A., the gang culture was pervasive, and it was really bad. But it didn't get really that bad until the Bloods were introduced much later on in the 70s, who I think they'd come from Chicago and really proliferated. And they had a story to tell, and I don't begrudge them that. I think that gangster rap had a place, and they had a story to tell. And when I first heard it, I totally recognized it. I mean, I lived in Carson, California, which is like a suburb of Los Angeles, and right next to a budding Compton. I mean, we're on the border of Compton and Torrance, and right on the Harbor Freeway. And so I knew all about the Crips. I mean, the Crips used to like gangbang at my high school. I mean, I knew all about the A.C. I knew all about these cats. I think that they had an important story to tell, and I thought that rap was a great way to do it. But I still think that it was exacerbated and inflamed by the profits, because what does a young white kid living in Arizona want to listen to if he wants to hear music that's going to upset his parents, which is the job of every teenager, by the way.
Right.
Every teenager. So what are they going to listen to? They're going to want to listen to something that's going to shock their parents who the parents grew up listening to, like, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What do you have to shock them with? Gangster rap. That's going to shock them. And I do believe that the prison industrial complex and elements of the music business did collude to put together this idea of let's make going to jail attractive because it's going to fill our prisons. And it certainly worked. I don't know whether it happened. Was there a conspiracy or not? I don't know, but it certainly happened.
I was going to say, I want to ask you this because I think it's very important. I mean, like the gang culture, I think it's really, the gang culture is the American mentality. The American mentality is the gang culture. But I was going to ask you about what made it different with the guys out west versus the guys out east, because as I recall from my research, African Bambaataa was the leader of the largest street gang in New York City, the Black Spades, correct?
Well, he wasn't the leader, but he was definitely an officer. He was, I think, one of the lieutenants of the Black Spades. He was not the leader of the Black Spades, no. But he was definitely in a major gang. It wasn't the biggest gang. One of the biggest was probably the Ghetto Brothers. But the Black Spades were definitely a major gang from his part of the Bronx. That's true.
It's important to talk about who was there, because when I read books, they will say, for example, that he was the leader of the Black Spades and it was the largest gang in NYC at that time. But you're saying that wasn't the case.
No, the Ghetto Brothers were probably the biggest gang, and also and Bambaataa was a little too young to be. There was another guy named Bambaataa who was older than DJ Africa Bambaataa, who was actually the president of that gang. And the reason I know all this stuff is because I actually helped write a screenplay called Rubble Kings, which explores, and we're hoping to make this film, which explores this whole time in the late 60s and early 70s of New York City. So, we did heavy research, and I don't know what the books that you're talking about said.
No, there's several books. Yeah, I'm glad that's why I got to talk to somebody who was actually there, because there were books they probably thought they got the wrong Bambaataa then.
They probably have the wrong Bambaataa, yeah. Each African Bambaataa that we know. He was too young, and he was a ranking officer in the gang. Mm-hmm. He was a ranking officer. But you have to understand that Bambaataa was part of a movement that happened in New York, again being, such a head and vanguard city, more than any other city in the country and certainly in the world, that along with there was a number of gang leaders at the time who, at a critical time in New York, and this was in the early 70s, recognized that what they were doing was just too destructive for them, and even the gangbangers recognized that what they were doing was just over the top. They recognized it. They saw it. And they, like a number of other political groups that some people might have construed as gangs, like the Black Panthers, like the Young Lords, which was a Puerto Rican group like the Black Panthers, they were starting to preach in the 60s even, let's organize, let's take care of our communities, let's protect our communities, let's make this a political struggle, not just some gang thing. So many of these gangs in New York were watching what the Black Panthers were doing in the 60s and realizing by the early 70s, I believe in 71, recognizing, okay, we've got to stop this. So I'll tell you a little quick history about this. And it is interesting because in many ways it does lay the groundwork for hip-hop that's going to come. But there are some people that also contend that, like my good friend Phase 2, one of the pioneering hip-hop aerosol artists, actually debates this point. But let me just make this point real quick. That, again, like I said, in the 60s, you already have organized groups, some people called gangs, like the Black Panthers, who are preaching something different than gangbanging. They're like, that's ridiculous, brother. Let's organize. It takes another 4 or 5 years of intense violence, specifically in the Bronx, amongst gangs like the Black Spades, the Savage Nomads, the Savage Skulls, the Ghetto Brothers, on and on and on, to get to a point to where they said, we can't sustain this. This is absurd. It's becoming surreal. This is so violent. So violent it was becoming surreal. And to be honest, it was the death of not. It wasn't the action specifically of anyone from the Black Spades in Bambaataa. It was from the Ghetto Brothers. It was a young man named Black Benji. See, there were two Benjis in the Ghetto Brothers. There was Yellow Benji, who was a Puerto Rican Jew, interestingly enough, who's still alive, and he was part of the screenplay, and interviewing him was a big part of the screenplay. Puerto Rican, had to hide the fact that he was Jewish. Never let anyone in the gang know that he was Jewish, because it would have potentially made him look soft to the rest of them. What do you mean? You're not Puerto Rican? Well, no, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm also a Sephardic Jew. Well, what the fuck is that? You know, it would have made it. It would have been like, it would have been dangerous for him. So he never told anyone in the gang that he was Jewish, that he went to temple, that he was religious, that his father was religious. They hid this, which is a fascinating story in and of itself. But he and Karate Charlie, another Puerto Rican, were the leaders of the Ghetto Brothers, easily the biggest gang in all of New York. They had chapters all over the city, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Bronx, in Queens, everywhere. So along comes, and these guys, by the way, had already, because it was just part of the media environment in New York City, the gangs were folkloric at this point. They had been in newspaper interviews. They had been interviewed and shot on television, interviews on TV, on PBS shows, etc., etc. They were kind of like folk heroes in New York. Everyone knew about these gangs. It wasn't like they were like underground. And they met a young man named Benjamin as well. You had Benjamin, who was Yellow Benji, and then you had Black Benji. Benjamin, sorry, his last name, I'm not sure. I think it was Washington. I'm not sure about his last name, but his name was Benjamin, and his gang name was Black Benji. He was black, and he was dark-skinned. And he was a community organizer, not unlike Barack Obama before becoming, state senator of Illinois. He was a community organizer. And Karate Charlie, who was the president of the Ghetto Brothers, and Yellow Benji, who was the vice president of the Ghetto Brothers, noticed Black Benji. Now the Ghetto Brothers was a totally mixed gang. They had blacks and Puerto Ricans side by side in the gang. They recognized in Black Benji a real voice of somebody who could organize. They were already thinking about leaving and turning away from the violence and turning more towards community organizing, like the Black Panthers, like the Young Lords. And so they recruited him into the gang, asking him to be part of their, youth organizing and educational. They had a lot of aspirations. And and Black Benji becomes part of the Ghetto Brothers, becomes a spokesperson, a very eloquent spokesperson, by the way, for not only the Ghetto Brothers but also for the youth in the Bronx. And he was already like in his 20s. He was already like, I think 21, 22 years old. He was already a young man. So, just to cut to the chase, they're already trying to bring peace, and they find out about a big throwdown between two other two other gangs. And Black Benji, wanting to show to earn his stripes in the Ghetto Brothers, says, I'm going to volunteers to go with 5 or 6 other Ghetto Brothers in a peace delegation to this park in the Bronx to stop the rumble, to stop the fight. They go, and he says, this actually happened. Peace, brothers, peace. as these two gangs of thousands of kids are converging, and they slaughtered him. They just wanted nothing to do with peace. They beat him to death. The other Ghetto Brothers that were with him ran to escape, and then the two gangs went at each other. Well, with the Ghetto Brothers' public media savvy, and having been on TV and having done this and having done that, the whole city knew about this. It was in the newspapers. And and I'm getting goosebumps telling this story, at Black Benji's funeral, I mean, this is unbelievable. At Black Benji's funeral, the reporters and the TV news and there's videotape of it. They're all asking Yellow Benji and Karate Charlie, is there going to be retribution? Is there going to be retaliation? Are you going to avenge Black Benji's death? And of course, the media wants to stoke that flame because that sells newspapers. That gets, violence and fighting is obviously, one of the great ways to sell newspapers, to get people's attention. It builds an audience. People love to see a fight. And they knew they could sell newspapers, and they were stoking that flame. And inside, now that's what happened. And what Karate Charlie said shocked everybody. But I have to go back a little bit, a few hours earlier, and tell you what had happened before they went into the funeral. At the funeral home, Yellow Benji and Karate Charlie went up to Black Benji's mother. Pretty sure her name was I think his last name was Washington, Mrs. Washington. Went up to her and said, they called her mom because she was a mother to all of them. She really like brought them in, fed them whenever they didn't have food to eat, and she really took care of them a lot. Black Benji's mother was like a mother figure to all the leaders of the Ghetto Brothers. So they went to her and they said, come to the window. Come to the window. And I'm actually very choked up about to tell you this. They said, come to the window. And she looked out the window, and there was 1,000 Ghetto Brothers facing her from the street, saluting her. And Karate Charlie said, we're going to avenge your son's death. You can be sure that there will be blood in the streets to avenge your son. And and Black Benji's mother said, but Charlie, my son died for peace. My son died for peace, not for this. He says, no, you can't do this. My son died for peace. And I'm sort of, filled with emotion right now because I'm thinking about Trayvon Martin and so many things going on. I can't get that out of my mind, but I don't want to dwell on that right now. We can talk about that in a minute, but Karate Charlie was like, and Karate Charlie, I actually talked to him about this, and Karate Charlie was like, damn. He recognized that she was right. And it was Yellow Benji who was really the leader of the Ghetto Brothers. He and Karate Charlie sat down and figured out that she was right. That they had to, that was the end. That they now had to bring peace. Even if it was through intimidation, they were going to force. Because, see, you have to understand, the Ghetto Brothers was the biggest gang. When the Ghetto Brothers said something, it shook everybody up. When they said something was going to happen, it happened. And so with the leadership specifically of Yellow Benji, kind of quietly from behind the scenes, and Karate Charlie as the spokesperson, they then left that, half an hour later, they left that meeting with Black Benji's mom, went to his funeral, and at the steps of the church, when the reporter said, is there going to be retribution? Is there going to be war? When is it going to happen? Is there going to be retaliation? They said, no retribution. There's no war. We're bringing peace. And the reporters couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. And they went into the funeral, and after the funeral, for weeks after that funeral, Yellow Benji and Karate Charlie organized meetings with all of the heads of all the gangs and forced them all to come to a community center on Hoe Avenue, H-O-E, in the Bronx, where everyone came together. There was the press there. It's on. You can probably find this on YouTube. We definitely have this footage in Shan Nicholson's documentary, who's my partner with the script, who is the director of the documentary called Rubble Kings, which is all about the story I'm telling you. In his documentary, you can see the footage, and you see all the gang leaders from all over the Bronx sitting there in delegations, the leaders, the lieutenants, the war council leaders, the whole thing sitting there in groups all together. And Yellow Benji is up talking to them all saying, this is it. This is the end. We are today going to sign a peace treaty. And he basically intonated that it's either we sign this peace treaty and walk out here as brothers, or you're not walking out. I mean, he wasn't threatening anybody in that same way, but he basically said in front of them all, he said one of the leaders came up to him, who was one of the gangs that had that fight that killed Black Benji that I mentioned earlier, came up to him and said, Benji, man, Yellow Benji, man, I want to get out of here alive. I want to get out of here alive. And he said in front of everybody, he said, somebody came up to me and said they want to get out of here alive. He said, but you didn't let Black Benji get out alive. You didn't let Black Benji, he's not here today. But we're here today. And you are going to bring the peace. And do you know the peace came from that? Now, the father of Bambaataa, and I say that in classic gang terminology, not literally Bambaata's father, but his older mentor in the black space was there at that meeting, and so was Bambaataa. And Bambaataa was at that meeting. Now he's a young kid; he's only 16, but he's inspired by this, and he's moved to take what Yellow Benji and the Ghetto Brothers did to go to the next level, to create entertainment, to destroy the gangs and create crews, to create DJ crews, to create party crews, to bring entertainment and fun and happiness. And when he created the Zulu Nation, that's what the Zulu Nation was about. It was about education. It was about positivity. It was about parties. It was about having fun. It was about music. And, you see that in Bambaata's history till today. And everything that he stood for in the last 35, 40 years. And I've been part of that in the beginning. I was bringing Bambaataa downtown to perform downtown at the Mud Club in different places. I was going up and interviewing him in 1981 and getting him in the newspaper for the first time. That was the first time he was ever in the newspaper, was my interview about him in the East Village Eye. So I was there. I know what I'm talking about. His whole movement with Zulu Nation has been all about music, art, culture, political awareness, but mostly including people from all over the world of every race, stripe, and color, of every sexual orientation, of every gender. He is an umbrella, an inclusive umbrella that invites everybody to be part of. And I think that kind of runs counter to what a lot of hip-hop artists think they are and rap artists today think they are. I don't think that they're quite as generous. I don't think that they're as generous as Bambaataa is. And I think that he'll always... But he was there. And so kind of I'm telling the story about how these gangs laid down their arms in the early 70s, and it built a platform for people like Bambaataa to build an entertaining, cultural, social network of people to come together for reasons and in ways other than in violence and in conflict. Now, that said, there are a lot of other hip-hop pioneers, like Kool Herc and like Phase 2, who will say, hang on a second, I wasn't in any gang. I didn't have anything to do with the gangs. My whole coming up as a graffiti artist or as a DJ or whatever had nothing to do with the gangs. Not everybody in the Bronx was in a gang, which of course not everybody in the Bronx was in a gang. Right. That would be kind of absurd. Imagine going up to the Bronx in the 70s and everybody's flying colors. It would just be absurd. If anything, there would probably be a minority of people who would be in gangs, and the majority of people kind of just going about their daily lives and avoiding them, like as much as they can. My contention is that the majority of young people in the Bronx at the time of the late 60s into the late 70s or mid-70s, when the gangs really went out of fashion, majority of them were not in gangs. Majority of them had nothing to do with gangs. They were just doing their thing. Some of them were experimenting with DJing and sound systems. Others were experimenting with graffiti. Graffiti is the first of all the hip-hop elements. That came first. That was happening first. The dance, that was always around, dance is such an ancient human, activity, certainly an ancient African activity. Maybe the dance was around first, but the first element of hip-hop that still looks the way it does now, kind of, and stayed and kept pure to its look, going furthest back in time, the first one had to be graffiti. And all these elements are playing themselves, are happening in the Bronx, not necessarily in a cohesive way, by the way. People aren't hanging around in the mid-70s going, okay, we're in this crew, and this guy's going to be a graffiti artist, and this guy over here is a break dancer, and this guy's doing DJing, this guy's on the microphone. It's not how it was. People who were b-boys and dancers, break dancers, they didn't necessarily hang out with graffiti artists, and graffiti artists didn't necessarily hang out with DJs, and rapping, I'll tell you the truth, as big as rap is today, at the time I was involved in hip-hop culture, was the least important. The most important element of the whole culture was the DJ. The DJ was king. The DJ made the party happen. He set the stage. And sometimes she, like one of the early female DJs, the hip-hop DJs that I worked with directly and filmed and videotaped way back in the early 80s was DJ Jazzy Joyce. I'm proud to say I have her on videotape. And by the way, again, to all of you supporters of the 30th Anniversary Graffiti Rock Kickstarter campaign, not only am I re-putting out the 30th anniversary of Graffiti Rock, the TV show, but the reason I'm trying to raise the money is to make a documentary about this whole scene from my vantage point, about the back, what happened, all these things that I'm talking about, but also some of the backstories behind the creation of Graffiti Rock, but as well as I'm putting out I'm opening up my vault of hip-hop footage, hours of hip-hop footage that nobody's ever seen. I'm putting out there, like footage of the first hip-hop female DJ like Jazzy Joyce and DJ K-Rob and Ram LZ and DJ High Priest, one of the first white hip-hop DJs. The videotape I have of Dougie Fresh. I helped sort of discover Dougie Fresh and put him on the map and did a lot of videotaping of him before he was even known. Before Graffiti Rock was a nationwide TV show, 2 years before that, I had I had two different cable TV shows that were hip-hop shows. So I had my own hip-hop TV shows before I had my own hip-hop TV show. So all of this stuff, all this videotape, I'm also putting out for all the pledgers who pledge to help support this Graffiti Rock 30th anniversary launch. So when you help me, believe me, you're not going to be just satisfied with the fact that you're helping me. You're going to be having access to all kinds of amazing hip-hop memorabilia, video, clothing, historic things that nobody else can share with you. So please go. Nobody has this but me. Nobody. So So please go to the Kickstarter and look for Graffiti Rock. All you have to do is write in Graffiti Rock. You'll find my page. And just take a look. Before you do anything, take a look at the different pledge amounts and what I'm offering to give you as a gift for pledging. And I think you'll be surprised at what I'm going to be sharing with the world. And so please pledge. We really need your help. Some exciting things happening with the pledge. We've had a lot of different interviews. We were on Rap Genius. I was on Rap Genius. I was on Combat Jack. But next week I'm going to be, there's a profile about me in the New York Times, which is kind of exciting, talking about some of the stuff, talking about some of the things I've been talking about here. So that's going to be really exciting. Just the fact that I've had a lot of love pouring out and people supporting this and telling me how important this was to them. Having people like Q-Tip say, man, when I was like a kid, 10, 12 years old, seeing Graffiti Rock, it changed my life. It made me want to be a hip-hop artist.
Wow.
I think, I did my job, and now it's time to revisit that time, because maybe it's rap salvation. Maybe the future of urban music, rap, hip-hop, whatever you want to call it, depends on perhaps going back in time a little bit and bringing all the elements of hip-hop, the history of bringing the history of hip-hop together again, to revisit what it was like to have the real hip-hop, all the elements of hip-hop, bring all those elements back together again and see how it might change hip-hop music for the better. I think it could. I think it would be the evolutionary step in rap that it sorely needs. But anyway, thank you everybody for hearing my little pitch there about Kickstarter, and I'm going to hand over back to Ron to let him ask more questions, because I know I just go on and on. Go ahead, bro.
Well, no, but the thing of this is very important. A lot of people don't get this type of information, and you kind of like you the real deal. You the official article. You the real artifact. Not saying your artifact isn't old, but you got the street cred, you got the cultural cred to talk the things you're talking about, because I think it's important that we do revisit this type of stuff, because I was talking to a civil rights movement veteran friend of mine last night for about an hour or so, and we were talking about that a lot of people want to do things, they want to be involved, they want to change the world, but they don't understand how to organize, they don't understand how y'all did it, because if you look at the popular media, you would think that all they did was just sing and do nice speeches and march. But there's a lot more to that if you're trying to organize a social movement, let alone create a real lasting culture. And so it's an honor to have you talk about that. And it's also an honor for folks to really support what you're doing, because you have given so much. It seems like to me when I listen to you talk, Brother Michael, and read up on you and all the stuff that you have done, that you are a real kingmaker. It seems like you have an eye and a mind for spotting real talent, whether it be like Dougie Fresh, whether it be the Graffiti Rock thing, providing a platform for like Run DMC and Kool Moe Dee, but also being able to connect with somebody like Jean-Michel Basquiat, the famous artist.
Right.
Good friends and collaborators.
Yeah.
I mean, why are we explaining? Are you lucky? Or what is the phenomenon you explain? Are you just lucky or blessed? Well, how do you describe it?
Oh, you mean like how is it that I've kind of found myself at so many different important historical moments? Yeah, I know what you mean. Listening to this, putting myself into the ears and mind of your listener, I can imagine them. I don't know, maybe somebody's thinking I'm kind of full of myself or something. I don't know. I hope not. I hope I didn't come off that way. But I will tell you this. And first of all, this is, in a way, it kind of isn't really about me. What you're suggesting is, I think what you're saying is, how is it that you have played this role as a zeitgeist, meaning how is it that you found yourself at all these interesting and crucial historical moments in time?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily me doing these things. It's just that growing up, I've always found myself at these moments in time in history where, especially in cultural history, where things seem to be happening in a big way, and I'm like, wait a second, how did I find myself, witnessing this? How did this happen? And it's happened, and you want to know something interesting, Ron, and to the public out there. I have witnessed this. I have noticed this since I was, in elementary school. That for some weird reason, I find myself at the crossroads of really fascinating cultural phenomenon and events. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
When I was born in 1955, so I'm like 58 years old now. I'm not a young chicken anymore, a spring chicken, but I was born in 1955. So I was like, and my father was an Army officer. And so we lived all over Europe and the United States growing up. That's just the nature of being in the military, being a military family. Your father, or in some cases your mother, depending on who's the actual active duty person, gets reassigned every 18 months. It used to be that way. I don't know if it's that way anymore, but every 18 months, you'd be reassigned to someplace else. It could be like in the other part of the world. It could be like halfway around the world. You could be in Okinawa for 18 months, and the next thing you know, you find yourself in Turkey, in an Army base in Turkey for 18 months. And you're just like, that was the life of the Army brat. And even though it can make you kind of neurotic moving around so much growing up, I loved it because, I guess I just loved seeing the world. I loved meeting so many different people, et cetera, et cetera. But being born in 55 and then having, and then being like a certain age when the whole doo-wop thing blew up, and I was very young, but then when the doo-wop thing coalesced into bands like The Temptation, it changed. It kind of went from the doo-wop scene into bands like, guy group bands like The Temptations, and girl group bands, or even on the white side like the Four Seasons. They had their history in doo-wop, and when they really blew up, I would have been like 6 or 7, and I remember the power of the Four Tops and The Temptations and all these soul Motown groups. And then also too the kind of like Italian American sound that was personified by the Four Seasons, whatever. They all had the same roots in doo-wop, which was pretty much early black R&B music of the 40s and 50s. I was kind of a witness to that, and my first memories was that kind of music. Then we moved to Germany in the early 60s. And boom, the Beatles blow up. And people that know the history of the Beatles know that Germany was a big part of their emergence onto popular music scene. They really cut their teeth in cities like Hamburg and Germany. And living in Germany, we sort of were privy to a lot of that. Even though we were Americans living on army bases, we heard about them, and we visiting England, I was able to be a witness to the whole British invasion before it happened. And then coming back to the States in 66, when my father assigned a tour in Vietnam, which again is a big part of American, culture, history.
Yeah.
And as we all know, the Vietnam War was a big influence in American pop culture and films and music and the politics, and the youth movement. So we moved to California, where my mother's mother was, so that we could be, living with my grandmother and being near her while my father's in Vietnam. Anybody out there who's military or military dependents understands what I'm talking about. What city do we move to in 1966? San Francisco. So here we are moving to San Francisco a year before the Summer of Love, and we're witnessing the emergence and explosion of the Black Panther Party from Oakland, the Hells Angels, the hippies in San Francisco, the whole countercultural movement. I'm there, like 12 years old enough to know what's going on, old enough to be able to understand what's going on. My dad's in Vietnam. The world around me in the West Coast, the Bay Area, West Coast, is exploding, is in the middle of the world's attention, And yet again, it feels like, wow, I happen to be in the right place at the right time in terms of culture, right? So I lived through that. Then, when my dad comes back from Vietnam, he decides he'd already both my parents were college educated, black people who were college educated before they even met each other. My father decides he's going to get his master's degree at USC. So we moved and he's out of the military, he's retired now, so we all moved down to Los Angeles in 1972, right in time for the explosion of Soul Train. So my older sister, who is college age in school at Scripps in Pomona not in Los Angeles, but in Southern California, a couple of hours from LA. She's going to university there, and she's of that age where, part of the whole black student, union and da-da-da-da-da, hanging out with all those kids. She actually knows some of these people who went to Crenshaw Flats and these different clubs in L.A. where all the Soul Train gang would party. And she used to take me to some of these clubs, and I'd see like Shabba-Doo and Don Campbell and Tony Basil going into the clubs like and where I'd be waiting in line like the Crenshaw Flats and all these different clubs, the Apartment, and seeing these cats doing the camel lock, and just like going, wow, man, I'm actually in the club where everybody else has to see this on TV around the country. I'm in the club, and as I was talking about earlier, I'm living in L.A. at the height of the whole Crips and gang scene in the early 70s. So again, Ron, for some weird reason, I'm in the right place at the right time in terms of being a witness. In terms of being a witness. I'm witnessing so far like everything from the British invasion, from Motown, British invasion, hippies, Black Panther Party, Hell's Angels. Do you know I actually witnessed, as a 12-year-old kid, I actually saw a famous riot. I was there when the hippies beat the shit out of the Hell's Angels, which is so bizarre because you think it would be the other way around. But there were so many hippies that there was this counterattack because Hell's Angels used to beat the hippies up all the time. And one time, all the hippies were like, the hell with this, and they grouped together and chased the Hell's Angels out of the Haight-Ashbury. I used to sit on my little Stingray bike and right on the Haight Street and watch all the tourists go by in their cars, looking out the windows of their cars and buses, pointing and looking at the hippies on Friday and Saturday nights. It was like a circus. It was like a parade. And because my cousin lived on Fell Street a couple of blocks away, I'd go visit him on the weekends, and we'd go look at the hippies on the weekends, like with the rest of the tourists. I can remember sitting on an amplifier on the stage in the panhandle of the Golden Gate Park as the Jefferson Airplane playing White Rabbit. With Grace Slick, you know what I'm talking about? One pill makes you larger, one pill makes you small, and the one pill that mother gives you doesn't do anything at all. Go ask Alice. It's like this hippie band, called the Jefferson Airplane. I'm one of the neighborhood kids sitting on the amplifier while they're doing a free performance in the park, and there's patchouli oil and marijuana and people drinking wine and everything. I mean, I grew up in that whole scene. Then it's like the whole, years later, I'm in high school, and I'm part of the Soul Train gang. And then I moved back to San Francisco. Now, dig this. I moved back to San Francisco to go to University of San Francisco, as the whole disco explosion's happening, and disco is such a big thing. And, I'm going to the disco now. I'm one of the straight guys going to the discos because a lot of the women that went were like models, and these beautiful women that would go with a lot of the gay photographers, And I'd be one of the straight guys there picking up all the models, man. I was like, shit, I knew what the hell I was doing, let me tell you. But then the point is, though, is that I'm in and not all the discos were gay, of course, but in San Francisco a lot of them were, but a lot of them were straight. Right. By the way, you know, people think of San Francisco as, you know, obviously a gay mecca, and in many ways it is, and I, you know, even though I'm not gay, I very much believe in gay rights, and I believe that everybody should have equal rights in this world, in this country, and I don't know how you can deny the rights from someone else that you yourself want to enjoy. Seems to me beyond stupid. But that said, San Francisco, though it's considered a gay city, it's not. It really isn't. The gay community there is not nearly as big as it is percentage-wise as it is in New York City. New York City is much more, many more gay people than San Francisco. Even proportionally, it's not. Ratio-wise, it's not. But anyway, San Francisco's famous ever since the gold rush days, when people came there in the 1860s. It had always been a mecca for countercultural people who felt marginalized by the majority. As a matter of fact, as early as the 1860s, there were a number of gay 49ers that went out there because there weren't any women out there mining for gold. So some of these guys would like turn gay for the time being because there weren't any women, and they dress up in drag in the 1860s. I'm not kidding you. Okay. I'm not kidding you. My mother went to San Francisco as a young girl in junior high and high school right before and during World War II, and she was telling me how San Francisco, before it was a gay mecca, was a big beatnik mecca. Huge. That was a huge beatnik place. That's where all the beatniks went in the 50s after World War II, like in the late 40s and early 50s. A lot of people don't know that. But it wasn't just New York City that was the famous city for beatniks. It was California, and it was specifically San Francisco and some degrees L.A. So now I'm going back up in time. It's mid 70s, and I'm in New York. I'm in San Francisco again, and then I joined this theatrical rock band called the Tubes, which was again another moment in pop cultural history, because you had the Tubes. You had Alice Cooper, you had David Bowie. These were all these bands that were doing these theatrical rock shows. And the Tubes, people don't know this now, but anybody who's old enough remembers the Tubes. In 75, they were the biggest thing in America. They were huge. White Punks on Dope, Young and Rich, all those songs. They were huge. They'd come to town, and we would do live shows with costumes and actors and dancers and sets. And it was like, people loved it. They loved it. And when we came to New York, I remember coming to New York in like 75 with the Tubes and just being like, oh my God, this is like the coolest city in the world. And I was witness to, just by visiting the city that year, and actually the year before with my cousins from D.C., seeing some of the early suggestions of what was coming in hip-hop culture. I was seeing some of the fashion and dances and all the things that were happening within the disco scene, because that was what was happening in the 70s, that would later become hip-hop culture. And you saw it in the fashion, you saw it in the dance. I'll give you an example. In 1974, I visited New York City with my cousins, Brenda and Peggy, and a friend of theirs from upstate New York. And they all were going to school at Bowie State near D.C. And so we went on a little trip in my Volkswagen Bug to New York City to spend like a weekend. And on a Sunday, one of the last days we were there on a Sunday, we went to this every Sunday afternoon dance party, if you will, that happened at Bethesda Fountain in Central Park, right around 72nd Street near the east side of the park, where this big area, bricked floored area in the park that had a big fountain in it, kids from all over the city, mostly black and Puerto Rican, a lot of white kids too, would show up at the park playing congas and all that stuff, but also there'd be 50 or more boom boxes, okay? all facing towards the fountain, all tuned to WBLS. Frankie Crocker's show, BLS, tuned in, afternoon, and he's playing everything from James Brown to Jimmy Castor Bunch to, you name it. MFSB, Love is the Message. I mean, all these classic disco tracks. And they're kids, mostly in their teens and 20s, populating this area, just having a great time dancing. As I recall, probably a lot of herb smoking, conga playing, all kinds, and wearing, like, what were they wearing? They were wearing, like, the uniform of New York at that time. Now, what was that uniform? The uniform was, you would go, the way you got your gear together back then was you didn't go to any store to buy new clothes. That wasn't the fashion then. The fashion then, which, if you want to understand that fashion, just check out what Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah band was wearing. Tommy Mottola, Cherchez la Femme, all those songs, Sun Showers. Everybody knows Cherchez la Femme, right? That whole look was all about the 1940s zoot suit look. You went to the thrift shop in your neighborhood, and back then, only the hip kids did this, so there were plenty of clothes that you could pick from, and you'd find yourself like an big Applejack cap, like, one of the hats that the newsy kids would wear, selling newspapers in the 1920s. You know what I mean? Or you'd get like a fedora gangster hat, like, mafia gangster hat from the 30s or 40s. You'd get yourself an outfit like a suit jacket from the 30s, like a zoot suit with big shoulders. You'd wear peg leg pants, like with pleats and kind of big baggy pants that would get tight down at the ankles. But then you'd also wear platform shoes. Or you'd wear marshmallows, which were kind of like nurse shoes with big white soles, big platform white, like kind of like cork, or, not rubber exactly, but kind of cork soles. That was the look. That's what, women would wear, again, also thrift shop dresses from the 40s and 50s. They would wear their hair like the Andrews sisters from the 40s and 50s. They would pluck their eyebrows like Bette Midler in the 30s, where they just have like a line as an eyebrow. That was the fashion back then. That's how kids dressed in the 70s. That was new. That was American glam fashion. Glamorous fashion was thrift shop 1930s fashion. And the only places that wore that look in any large numbers was in New York City, of course. That's where the fashion really started, but also to a certain degree in San Francisco and a certain degree in L.A., in the disco worlds of those places. Other places, to a degree, maybe they did that gear in Boston a little bit, even in Toronto, but that was about it. Nobody else understood that fashion. Everybody else tried to dress like John Travolta in what was the film he did? Saturday Night Fever. Polyester bell bottoms, and what the latest fashion was out of the Sears catalog. The hip kids dressed like zoot suiters. They dressed like Cab Calloway. They dressed like Duke Ellington. That's how we dressed from the 30s and 40s. A lot of people don't know that. So you go to, like I was saying, went to New York in the mid-'70s. I saw like a whole crowd of people dressed like that, dancing to disco music in the park in the middle of the daytime. Like tea dances, doing the Latin hustle, doing line dances. Okay, like everyone probably knows either the L.A. hustle or the bus stop. Well, no, today it's called the electric glide. Yeah. Today it's called the electric glide, and people don't even do it anymore, but they did it at least in the 90s and whatever, right? But back in the 70s,
they do. Yeah,
maybe they still do it. But back in the 70s,
they still do it.
They probably still do, yeah. But back in the 70s, that was they called it the bus stop on the East Coast and the LA hustle on the West Coast. That was all part of part of this culture called disco culture that eventually transformed itself in the late 70s and early 80s into hip hop. Disco is the father of hip-hop. Anybody that knows anything that was there will tell you that that's true. Disco laid the groundwork for hip-hop more than anything else. But it's a confluence of many things. Disco culture, graffiti culture, the gang culture, many different... And I'll tell you another super important element to the beginnings of hip-hop that a lot of people don't understand is New York City itself. Hip-hop culture, as we understand it, would have never happened, could never have happened anywhere else. Now, I'm not bragging on New York. You know, I'm a New Yorker. I'm not really a New Yorker. I mean, I am a New Yorker now, but I wasn't born. I'm not a native New Yorker. I wasn't born and raised here. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm a California kid, and I'm an Army brat. I lived around the world. I wasn't born and raised here, but I tell you what, the fact that I did grow up around the world gives me, and I'm not from New York, gives me an objectivity and a perspective that allows me to see things very clearly. And even New Yorkers sometimes don't even understand this. Hip-hop culture could not have happened anywhere else. Nowhere else. And the reason that is because the nature of New York... Now, first of all, let's lay the groundwork for this history. First of all, you have black people living in New York in a respectable number, in a percentage high enough to where they influenced this city as early as the 17th century. The first blacks in this city were slaves, of course. They built the wall at Lower Manhattan that turned into Wall Street. Black people in the West Village of New York, there's one street called Gay Street, just like it sounds, G-A-Y, in the West Village, near jazz clubs like what's the name of it? When I have to say things like this and I forget the name, the Village Gate, Village Vanguard. Okay. There's a street called Gay Street. It's a very, very old street. It had nothing to do with homosexuality. That street was a black street in the 18th century, in the 1700s. That was a street that was populated mostly by black people. That whole neighborhood was mostly black in parts of it. Many slaves as well as freed. A lot of people don't understand that a lot of black people that lived in this whole country, in the South as well, we weren't all slaves. Many black people were freed men. We weren't equal to white people. We still aren't equal to white people, as we know only too well. But not all black people in this country, even in the 19th century, in the height of slavery, were slaves. And ironic to say, and bizarrely to say, there was a large number of black people that owned slaves.
Yes. People
don't like to talk about it, but it's true. In this country, black people own slaves. You know, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. But anyway, I'm digressing here, and you must know about these famous books that are about this, that chronicle that culture. In Louisiana was the most egregious example of it. There were more blacks that owned slaves in Louisiana than anywhere else. And I suppose maybe it has something to do with, its French culture and background and the whole way that black people in Louisiana and other places like Haiti that have French history to them had such a sensitivity to the different colors of black people and how that was stratified and how the lighter skin you were, maybe the more superior you were supposed to be, and on and on and on. How that was thrown, how that played out in Haiti. So maybe because Louisiana had that weird history and has this French history, maybe that has something to do with the reason why there were so many blacks that owned slaves in that state, more than any other state. But I believe there were blacks that owned slaves in every state in the South. Must have. But anyway, that's a whole conversation.
You got a famous furniture maker out in North Carolina named Thomas Day. He had owned some slaves, I think 14 slaves, a well-known black furniture maker during the 19th century. And also with Louisiana, you said that piece, but also Louisiana had more chapters of UNIA, Marcus Garvey organization, than any state in the Union. They had more chapters of UNIA back in its heyday, back in the 20s, in the 1910s. And also Huey Newton from, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And
but by the way, Before we digress on that, I realized I know I digress. What was I really originally talking about? I was talking about New York.
New York.
I was talking about black people in New York. I really want to get back to that because I don't want to confuse it with. But by the way, that's a whole conversation I'd love to talk about too. But I want to get back to hip hop and why hip hop could have only happened in New York.
Right.
You see, New York, its history is a history. Now, what I was saying was first let's lay the groundwork. There were black people in this city from the beginning of the city, even when the Dutch owned it.
Right. Exactly.
There were black people. So. Yeah. It wasn't just part of a southern black migration going north like Detroit or Chicago. New York had black people for centuries before that, had a black community before that. So when you have but we also know that New York is a city of immigrants. We know that more than any other city in the country, maybe even in the world, New York stands out as a city of immigrants coming from around the world trying to make a name. Trying to get a piece of the pie, trying to flex their economic muscle. That's why they left wherever they were from. They wanted to come to America to make a new life for themselves. But they also wanted to, while they're in this place, they wanted to flex their cultural muscle. Each tribe that came here, regardless of where they were from, wanted to say, "Hey, we might be from Greece, or we might be from Ireland, or we might be from China, wherever we're from. But check out the way that we dress, check out the way that we speak, check out the way that we dance, check out the way that we make food, check out the way that our music and our culture." That had been going on when New York really was a mecca for immigration much later on, like, in the earlier 19th century. But before that, you had already Africans, French, English, Dutch. You had that already going on. You already had a port city like New York, like Hamburg, like a lot of port cities where there's already going to be a lot of action, a lot of culture, potentially a lot of crime, a lot of music, a lot of commerce and business. That's the nature of cities that are on ports, right? So there's already culture brewing and growing in the city. Then you start to have immigrants coming in. You start to get, in the 1860s, you start to get like Irish, and they're coming in with their language and their dance and their brogues and their music. And it's the black people, free and slaves, who were here already in the 1840s and 50s when the Irish started coming, who were poor, living in 5 Points in Lower Manhattan, rubbing shoulders and living with the poor Irish who came. They all lived together in the projects together in 5 Points, which is what that film Gangs of New York was really about. But to be honest, the film is terrible. I love Scorsese, but the film is terrible and really has nothing to do with the book Gangs of New York, which is more of a documentary about the times. Read the book Gangs of New York and you'll really see what that's about. But black people and Irish people living together in the projects, I mean, it was horrible slums in 5 Points in Lower Manhattan, which is like Tribeca now. They lived together, and together with African dance and Irish jig created tap dancing. Their being together created tap dancing.
Well, actually, just like you talking about New York being a city of immigrants, I had ran into a Jamaican who lived in England for a number of years. He lived over here for a number of years. And he made a great point about New York as far as Jamaican. You talking about how hip-hop would not have been hip-hop without the Jamaican influence. A lot of hip-hop.
And I was going to get to that. The Jamaican influence, the major Jamaican influence in hip-hop, a lot of people say toasting. I don't agree with that. Even though Jamaican DJs were toasting in a big way, come on. What were they copying? They were copying radio from Miami. I'm sorry, that is not an original thing. I'll tell you what the Jamaicans did bring to New York is the sound systems. Those jams in the parks that I was talking about, that Bambaataa would throw, that Cool Herc and everybody would throw in the parks, those sound systems that they built came from Jamaican culture. Of major massive sound system. Now, the other thing that they would say, and I understand, and this is also true, that So many of hip-hop pioneers were second-generation Caribbean.
Right.
Many of them were second-generation Caribbean, but they weren't all from Jamaica. They were from all over. They were from a lot of different countries. Like Mo D, his family was from another part of the Caribbean. I forget which part. But many of them were part of the Jamaican and Caribbean migration to New York. But that said, how often do you hear Bambaataa, Kool Mo D, Jazzy, all these different artists saying, "Yeah, man, Jamaica is a major part of hip hop. It's Jamaican culture that made it." You never hear that, ever. You know where you hear that from? Librarians of New York culture and history who want to find an angle to kind of say, "Oh, I've discovered something new," or you hear it from Jamaicans who understand the culture, but you never hear that from Bambaataa, who is a second-generation Caribbean. You know why? I'll tell you why. They don't say that. They don't say. Here's what. Before I say it, here's what I want to say. I want to say that Jamaicans had a major influence in hip hop culture, just as much as, but not as much as Black Southern music and disco and R&B and soul. Hell no.
Well, James
soul
Brown,
R&B is a much greater impact. If you want to know, you know what hip hop, the shoulders. If you have any one single person that the shoulders they stand on is James Brown.
Yeah, James Brown. Yeah,
that's Georgia. I mean, Black American R&B and soul is the engine that drove hip hop in terms of culture and music. But Jamaican culture, yes, influenced hip hop in many different ways, not only in technologically, but in socially, but not musically. Hip hop music doesn't depend on reggae. There's no reggae music in hip hop. So let's not get carried away with that. But yes, I would definitely put Jamaicans in there as major influences in hip hop. I would definitely put, but at the same time, I would put Chinese people in there. I would put kung fu movies as a major part of hip hop influence. I would put Jewish culture as a major influence in hip hop culture. I would put the whole Jewish music machine, Tin Pan Alley, the whole 1960s musical movement that happened, that was in many ways financed and powered by Jews in the music business, for better or for worse. Their humor, their contributions to New York in general. I would say that about the Irish. Tap dance. I would say the same thing about the Italians and their gangsterism, if you will. That gangsterism, Italian gangsterism, isn't a part of hip hop. Come on.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of it.
It's a major part of hip hop.
Yeah.
What I'm
DJ
saying,
Kool Herc was born in Kingston, but he don't talk about it, I guess.
He doesn't talk about Kingston. My point to you and my point to your listeners is this: New York City, with its multifaceted energy and cultural power that comes from all the people that are in this town, block by block, cheek to jowl, competing with each other as to who's the best dancers, who's the best makers of food, who dresses them. Now, I'll tell you one thing: if you look at all the typical New York youth, going back hundreds of years, his fashion, the way he wore his cap, the way he dressed, all comes from, in my opinion, the black youth culture that goes back to the 17th century. They're the ones that set the stage, and they always have. Black kids have always set the stage. The proof in the pudding is that young black teenagers have always been the vanguard of every major important cultural movement in the world since in the last 100 years. Whether it be jazz, blues, soul, funk, disco, it's always black teenagers who are either the creators of it and or the audience and the ones who are the first on the set to drive it forward. Then you've got the Irish kids coming in and going, yeah, I want to wear my hat like that too, in the 1840s and 50s. Then you've got like the Jews and the Irish and the Italians and the Greeks and everybody else all adding to that stew, but it's a stew that was based on black language, slang, dance, music. Then you've got the Jamaicans coming in, but kind of, years, 100 years after we already established blues and, R&B and all the things that we know are American and American black culture. But it takes a city as racially and culturally diverse and sophisticated. These other, I'm sorry, but the rest of the country is not as sophisticated as New York. It just isn't. That's sophisticated to where, and that media focused, and that much on the world stage, a star on the world. New York is the star on the world stage, the number one star on the world stage. The whole world looks to New York. When New York sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold culturally. London's number two. London's right behind us. I mean, look at the power of the English rock and roll scene for such a small country. How did they do it? I don't know how they did it, but they're definitely number two.
Who gave it to them? Though? Like you said a great point. Who gave them that power?
We gave them that power.
Right, exactly. Like you said, the black people set the tone. The black
but
Americans.
You know something?
Go ahead.
The Dutch have as equal a command of the English language as the English do. I mean, even though that's not their native language, the Dutch speak English like it's their mother tongue. How come they didn't come up with one rock and roll band that we care about?
They gave us Van Gogh, right? They gave us Van Gogh.
Yeah, but I'm talking about popular culture and music. That's kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about hip hop.
Right.
How come no other country in Europe came up with anything close to the output of the English and Americans? I think it's because because Americans speak the English language, and we have a combination of Africans in this country with the English. It's that combination and the pain and suffering that comes from slavery. Because like philosophers like Eckhart Tolle will tell you, from suffering comes greatness, and it's our suffering that created the R&B, the disco, the soul, the funk, the James Browns of the world that allowed disco to stand on, that allowed hip-hop to stand on his shoulders. Singularly is James Brown.
Right.
Huh?
I was going to say what you said about the English invasion. I actually said who invaded England when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones would come over here. Who came over there? Who was the person that came over there?
Well, a lot of the music that they were
understanding. Who was the person who came over there? You said like, how did they get that type of influence? Who was the person that came over there when the Beatles and them was coming over here? Think about it.
Well, I mean, you want individual names? I mean, like for example, when Jackie Wilson I'll give you a perfect example. This is a little later than the British invasion. This is like maybe 10 years later. But when Jackie Wilson came to England and he did a tour of England, he nearly single-handedly created what we now understand, or anybody out there that knows about this, of what is called Northern Soul. Do you know about Northern Soul?
Northern Soul, Blue Eye.
I mean, that's like a whole movement in Northern England, nothing to do with London, which is in Southern England. They don't even know it. They don't care about Northern Soul. This is all in Manchester, Birmingham, in these industrial parts of Northern England where they worshipped not only Jackie Wilson, but more so the Motown songs, the B-side songs that were these faster beats, boom, 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 that they came up with these dances to, and that we didn't like these songs, but they became hits in Northern England, but they were all Motown bands.
And also, the Duke record label from Houston, they had a couple of songs that hit big with the no.
Oh, did they really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a couple, people don't know these people's names over here, but they hit really big over there. But the person I was thinking about, because you're thinking about rock and roll guitars, is Jimi Hendrix. That's the reason.
Oh, Jimi Hendrix, but
he could not make it over here, but he went over there.
No, I would disagree with you because the whole British invasion. No, but wait a second. The whole British invasion started in 1962, and 61 and 62.
Right.
You know, Jimi Hendrix wasn't doing what he was doing until, you know, much later, in 66, 67, he was getting really electric blues. But I understand what you're saying. I mean, Jimi Hendrix was doing his thing and starting to really experiment very early on. He was in Little Richard's band, but
Ghetto Brothers.
But you know, you got to give respect to the English. They were already deep into soul and into psychedelic music before before they ever heard of Jimi Hendrix. But when Jimi Hendrix came, he just blew the roof off of it.
Right, he's like Charlie Parker. He didn't invent jazz, but Charlie Parker took it in another direction. But even with the English, it was B.B. King, the Chess Racket people, Hollywood, Piccadilly Square,
not Jimi Hendrix,
Willie Dixon.
B.B.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
B.B. Now you want to talk about the pioneers? Yeah, the people that brought the blues to England would have been the B.B. Kings, and even some of the Texas cats that came out in the 30s.
Little Richard too. Little Richard.
Yeah, Johnson.
Little Richard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what about like early guys like you know, Robert Johnson? I mean, the English kids were pretty smart, man. They were feeling all that.
They were studying us, right? They studied us very well because they brought Robert Johnson back to prominence in the 60s. Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, all them guys. Right. So really, we gave like George Gershwin, though. People love George Gershwin, but all his teachers were really black. He had black teachers.
Of course.
You know, he learned from Lucky Roberts, the stride piano players, James Reese Europe. These were his heroes that he learned from. You know, that we don't understand. That's what I'm saying. Like, even with hip hop, like all this stuff you talk about going up around the world in San Francisco, is getting you prepared for the seminal moment in cultural history that a lot of people don't give you enough credit for, which is graffiti rock. And that's why I want to talk about graffiti rock.
Let's talk about graffiti rock before the time is up.
I don't think I can do this. But, you know, I saw Unsung with Kool Moe Dee, and he talked about the power of graffiti rock in his Unsung last year. He gave you a name shout out. Kool Moe Dee, the TV1 series Unsung. He gave you a name shout out.
Yeah. That's right. I love that. I mean, he's a cool guy, man. I love Kool Moe Dee. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
what were you going to do? You go ahead and talk, man. What?
No, but I'm saying, like, people don't understand how great you guys are. I mean, Kool Moe Dee was like, man, he's a technician. He's a rapper's rapper. But we don't think about, because we got this pop cultural phenomenon where we forget about the past, or we don't know about the past. Like, people could easily say LeBron James is the greatest of all time. But we had Jordan. We had Will Chamberlain. We had Magic Johnson. The people who research their history. How can he be the greatest and neglect all the history?
I mean, come on. You can't even compare LeBron James to
Well, people do it, though. It's the media thing. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, but it's the media thing, right? It's they control the narrative. Like, you told me there was two Bambadas. I didn't know that. I didn't know there was two Bambadas. All the history magazines and hip-hop, Vibe magazine, for example, they said it was Africa Bambaataa was the leader of the Black Spades, not this other Bambaataa, not the older one. So we don't even know our own history. So we have no knowledge of self. Our knowledge is truly knowledge about who you are. No self-determination, but yet we found you with graffiti rock. Very self-determined. We defined the parameters of what it is to be hip. Basically, providing the blueprint for what was to come with MTV and VH1. And, I mean, BET about to have the hip-hop awards. Have you ever won an award from BET or VH1 or MTV?
No, none of those guys want to recognize the early, you know, that's the thing that kind of annoys me a little bit is I always thought, like, you know, graffiti rock would have been recognized on MTV's, you know, hip-hop awards. That never happened. And I don't know what drives that mentality. I think a lot of it had to do with at a critical time in the 80s when, you know, the Def Jams and a lot of the major labels were blowing up and saw the money in rapping. I think that they kind of tried to kick the rest of the hip-hop culture, you know, aerosol art, graffiti art, b-boying, a whole bit, DJs. We all got kicked to the curb. They all got kicked to the curb, really. We were kind of inconvenient. You know, we were an inconvenient truth that without, and I'll tell you something, without breakdancing, I mean, you know, I'm sure some people think it's corny, some people think it's this and that, and that's your right. But trust me when I tell you this, that it was the breakdancers and the b-boys and the DJs, but more the breakdancers than anybody else that kicked open the door for hip-hop to enter into the living rooms of America. It was the breakdancers. That was who everyone was curious about at first.
Who was the manager of the breakdancers, the NYC Breakers? Who was the manager of the NYC Breakers?
Oh, I was.
All right, there you go.
I created the New York City Breakers, but I managed unofficially the Rocksteady crew too for a little while before I created the New York City Breakers. Yeah, I was friends with Crazy Legs and Frosty Freeze and all those cats, man. We were all, it was an exciting time when all this was so new and we could do anything. Every club wanted us to appear. It was like hot knife through butter. It was such a fun time.
I mean, it's amazing how humble you are. It's like, you know so much information. That's why I could sit here and just listen to you all day talk about things, because you just know so much just from researching and living. It's very impressive. But to be humble, but I just think it's unfortunate that we don't really pay homage where homage is due. Like, how many people wouldn't be eating right now if it was for people like you doing what y'all did back in the day?
Well, that's true, man. And I think the key thing is people like me. It wasn't just me.
Right.
Fab Five Freddy was one of the very first of the downtown people who were bringing hip-hop artists downtown. But even before him was Henry Chalfant was bringing artists downtown from the Bronx to perform and to show their art to the downtown scene. I'll tell you some other pioneers, like photographer Martha Cooper and filmmaker Charlie Ahern. To be honest, I would say myself, Fab Five Freddy, Charlie Ahern, Henry Chalfant, and Marty Cooper. Those 5 people stand out in my mind as real pioneers of the downtown scene, bringing hip-hop artists downtown to introduce them to the rest of the city and the rest of the world, especially the media, the journalists, the TV crews, who would never go up to the Bronx, who would never risk life and limb to go up to the Boogie Down and witness this thing, didn't even know what was going on, didn't care until the 5 of us and other people, by the way, I include on a second level down, like people like Ruza Blue. She was definitely part of, even though she wasn't even American, she was English. She helped introduce hip hop to the rest of the world in her own way. And there were other people too, a lot of them go unnamed. But the 5 of us primarily really were the champions in bringing that whole scene downtown, which gave it the ability to breathe, be appreciated by the foreign press, by foreigners. Because in many ways, like take for example Malcolm McLaren or the tour that the whole hip hop tour that went to France and London and England and Japan early on, that happened because we were bringing them downtown. And I'll promise you, in my estimation, as an armchair anthropologist and cultural maven, I believe very strongly that if we hadn't brought this culture downtown, even though you had things like what was the first rap record that came out by
Sugar Hill Gang. They stole
Sugar Hill Gang. Even though that record had come out very early on in the late 70s, rap and hip hop would not have happened if it hadn't been for the downtown scene giving it a platform to perform in front of a downtown and national and international audience and media. It wouldn't have happened. It would not have happened. And if it did happen, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been as big. It would not. It would have kind of come and gone. They would have said, okay, some guy's kind of rhyming over a beat. Well, that's kind of happened before. So what? What about the Last Poets? What about like Gil Scott-Heron? This doesn't seem that new to me. I think was the reaction to by the media and by the audience. It was all the elements of hip hop that made it go, wow, what a powerful and comprehensive culture this is. With the dance, with the DJing, with the art, with the fashion, this whole Bronx aesthetic and sensibility. That's really what put it on the map.
Man, let me ask you this, Brother Michael. I was thinking, when I'm listening to you talking about all this stuff, I'm just thinking, man, this is almost 30 years later for Graffiti Rock. Could you imagine the stuff y'all was doing just in downtown, man, this downtown New York City will become this worldwide phenomenon? Like, think about all the people. I think about Jay-Z. I think about Tupac, Biggie. I think about all this stuff that has happened almost 30 years since Graffiti Rock. Do you understand that this was going to be as big, this hip-hop thing was going to be as big as it became?
We did not know. We were just having a good time.
Or trademark it or something.
We were having a good time. We wanted to impress our community, the 2,000 or 3,000 people that we sort of knew about in the city. We wanted to impress the city of New York. We wanted to have parties that we could invite people to. But we also knew that New York was a global media village. We knew that the whole world had its eye on New York. But to be honest, no. We were kind of humble. But I'll tell you this. When I had the Club in the Grill with Ruza Blue, and she went on to do Roxy's, and I went on to do my stuff on TV, cable TV, and I was always looking at, what if I could do this on a national TV level? This is all so entertaining. I love it so much. It's just this would work on a national TV show. I guess, as early as 81 and 82, that's when I was planning all my hip-hop TV shows and actually had my cable shows. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this on national TV, but I really wasn't thinking about the impact. I was just thinking, let me get this on TV. This is so entertaining. I didn't stop and think, and then when it's on TV, then all these big major record labels are going to pick it up, and then this is going to happen. This is going to spread around the world, and I didn't think of that. Nobody did. And I'll tell you something. In my interview in the East Village Eye, which I think is going to be coming out in a compilation book of all these different seminal articles in the East Village Eye. The publisher and my good friend, God, I always forget everybody, Leonard Abrams, who is the publisher of East Village Eye. And he's the one who gave me the opportunity to write about all this stuff. And again, that's where you got to tip your hat to Jews in New York. They've always been, there've been a lot of, I'll be honest, there's been a lot of smart business-like Jews in New York who have been known to exploit popular music and culture and artists. And oftentimes there's a bad name attached to that. But 10 times more than the ones who were exploitive, who made all the money, there were Jews who were the club owners, the promoters, the managers, the publishers, like Leonard Abrams, who published East Village Eye, who with making no money on his own, said, I just want to have a newspaper that tells this story. The writers and the artists, you got to give credit to the Burt Bacharachs and the Tin Pan Alley writers like what's her name, who wrote Natural Woman and you know what I'm talking about. The army of Jewish artists who have written and created music that we have shared together. Jews and blacks have shared together. So much of the music that we made as doo-wop artists and early R&B artists, a lot of that music was written by Jews. And yes, were they not inspired by black artists before them? Of course. But they were there in the trenches making this shit happen and supporting it in many ways. And so I guess I kind of went off on a tangent. I was just trying to describe how New York is like this international city that again, I'm kind of going off on these tangents, but that it's a multi-tribal city that brings the business and brings the art. Anyway, I don't know, what was I talking about? We were talking about.
But it sounded like Graffiti Rock couldn't happen anywhere but New York City at that time.
Graffiti Rock could not have happened anywhere else but New York City. It just couldn't have. It needed all those elements, huh?
Well, I was thinking about you made African Bambaataa dream. You put it through a television screen. His dream for uniting folks to hip hop, the Zulu Nation. But you actually helped visualize it for him, because I think about Graffiti Rock. You had people of all races and all socioeconomic backgrounds having a good time.
Something. Bambaataa was one of the associate producers of the show.
Okay, there you go. It's all related. But I just think that now, like you talking about earlier in our conversation, the conspiracy to co-opt the music or to control the music to fill up the prisons. And, like you said, conspiracy or not, but you see the fruits of that discussion. I mean, my thing is, when we know that is what people are doing to us, the system is doing to us, why we cannot stop it? I mean, if y'all were able to organize like Black Benji, y'all don't guys were able to do what they did. Go ahead, I'm listening.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. That's one answer, because it's a complex world we live in, a complex country, and there's no one answer to anything. But one of the answers, and I used, as you know, I taught at Howard University for 8 years, taught screenwriting on the strength of the fact that I was one of the writers on the screenplay of Schnabel's film Basquiat, about Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Oh, right, yeah.
So anyway, I was teaching at Howard University, teaching film. It's like 99% black school. All my students were black, but some weren't. Some were from around the world, whatever. But I used to tell them, I said, you know something? And this is a little bit cynical on my part, but you all are about to enter into the entertainment world, and you're going to find it, because I know this, as somebody who tries to make really interesting, challenging films and television, whatever, you're going to find it very difficult. You're going to find it very difficult to break into this field, especially as young black people. However, if you choose to enter into the entertainment business along the paradigm or model of debasing yourself and your people, if you enter into the entertainment business cooning yourself, being basically being a coon. If you coon yourself, and we all know what that means.
Yes.
Debasing yourself, making yourself a joke, making yourself a spectacle, an ignorant fool who makes a fool of yourself and your people. There's not enough wheelbarrows on a farm to carry away the money that they're going to give you if you choose that path. I told them that. I said, if you choose the path of cooning, there's not a bank account big enough to hold the money that they will give you to make that choice. So you want to be a success, you want to guarantee success and live the good life, be that coon. Because there's not enough money that they'll give you to reward you to play that role. And you're born and raised, you're born poor and you grow up poor, and you have an opportunity to take that shot, to play that role. It's hard to resist it. It's hard to resist it.
Wow.
It's hard not to take that bait. When they guarantee you money, more money than you could ever spend. And let me tell you something. If you're halfway smart and you want to play the coon, you want to play the nigger, and I mean nigger with an E-R, they will reward you. Society will reward you because it makes people who themselves came from peasantry and who came here 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, whenever they came here, who themselves came here as peasants, who themselves came here second and third class citizens, came to this country and had an opportunity to reinvent themselves as first class citizens, who their cousins from the countries that they left looked down on them like, oh, these Americans. Doesn't matter if they're white. English people look at white Americans as garbage, as peasants. French people look at white Americans as garbage and peasants. They think we're much more interesting. They think the real Americans are black people. And this is not, of course, everybody, but we see this in the Trayvon Martin case. We see this in our lives every day, that there are many, many people in this country who their whole lives are wrapped up in the importance of being white. And if their whiteness isn't superior to everybody else, especially black people, they get confused and frightened, and they don't know what to do with themselves. And the reason why that is for reasons they don't understand. The reason why that is because they were peasants where they were from. They were either thrown out or ran away from the countries that they were from. And so when they came here, they wanted to now be the kings. They wanted to now be the aristocracy that had that boots on their necks for thousands of years. They lived for thousands of years with the boots of the aristocracy and the monarchy of the places that they were from, whether it was France, Ireland, Italy, Poland, Greece, wherever you're from, and you came here running away from your history as a nigger in that world. So you came here, and all of a sudden you could reinvent yourself to be at the top of the heap, to be the man. But in order to do that, you needed a nigger to put your boot on their neck. And we, because of our color, we're the color of night. That's why we're so frightening to people. It's not just because we're from Africa. It's because we're the color of night, and the nighttime has been a frightening time for human beings, for all human beings, even Africans, for 1.5 million years, ever since we've been able to communicate, ever since we've been able to organize in groups and hunt and gather. The nighttime is the most dangerous time. Only in recent history has the nighttime been held back by electric light. That's very recent. The majority of the time in human history, I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but the majority of the time in human history has been dominated by, when it gets dark, you stay inside. And you go outside, you're going to be eaten. So we're not just hated because we are Africans and we came from a different cultural and technological history. We were not as advanced as the Europeans when it came to technology. We're not, and you just have to face that. That's not why they hate us, though. They hate us because they fear us, and they fear us because we're the color of night. And it's easy. And because it allows them to say, I'm superior, I feel great about myself. God, 3 generations ago, we were peasants being beaten and set on fire and broken at the wheel by medieval, not 3 generations, but 10, 15, 20 generations ago, we were the niggers in Ireland. We were the niggers in France and Germany and all these places that we ran from. Now we're number one. And we, black people, have to play the role of the nigger in this culture in order to make the peasants from around the world who came here feel not like peasants anymore. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
And our job in this culture is to play that role. I mean, that's our job. That's the job that society has given us. Play that role and you'll be rewarded. Step out of that role, there's trouble. And I know that sounds cynical, and I hate to make anyone feel bad. And I don't feel, and I'm just telling you what I'm not saying this out of anger or hate. I'm telling you I'm part white. I know this.
Yeah, but
it's part of the history of the country.
Look at Paul Robeson, for example. He had a lot of money. He was making a lot of money. He started speaking out and not knowing his role, like you said, his place in our society, and they punished him severely. They kept him alive and punished him.
Yeah, he couldn't step out of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're saying is based on a lot of truth. If you look
Are you still in the air, by the way?
Oh, yeah. We just got off the air. Well, I'm about to wrap it up. I want to thank you, but we got the Kickstarter information posted on our website and stuff that we've been putting out on Twitter. And
we didn't get a chance to get any. We didn't get a chance to have any people call in, though, did we?
Oh, it's fine. I mean, I think that people want to listen. There are a lot of people listening in. I know that much. Looking at the numbers here, statistics, we had a lot of people listening in, and I'm surprised at the number of people that are listening. Not only they're listening, but the type of people that are listening to these shows. And really, I mean, who's going to talk? I mean, you got so much to say. You got so much to put out there. That's why it's important that we support this effort to get this documentary done, because this is our history. This is about us. This is about where we come from. This is what we can do. You know what I'm saying? Like, you represent I mean, to me, I look at black people as being like universal alchemists. We create something out of nothing.
Right.
They give us, busted instruments. We create jazz. They cut out music education in schools. We create hip-hop, rap, whatever. We always creating something. A lot of times we give up ownership of what we create. And now you're trying to reclaim this. You're trying to reclaim Graffiti Rock from the cultural bandits and all these folks that would, write these books and mislead people down the wrong alley. And you're trying to get us back on the right path. So I appreciate all you have done and will continue to do. And I look forward to supporting you in other endeavors as well.
I was thinking of Carole King, by the way.
Oh, really? Carole King. There you go. It came to you eventually. But I just appreciate you do what you do, Brother Michael. We're going to keep you. We're going to bring you back in Memphis sometime in the near future. We're working on that right now. I know we had that conversation last summer, but we're definitely working on trying to bring you back in the very near future.
Yeah, I can't wait, man. Well, I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much, Brother Ron, man. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you. It's an honor, man. We love you madly, in the words of great Duke Ellington.